My daughter didn't raise him. She didn't feed him, fight for him, or lose a single night's sleep over him. But the moment he was worth $5.6 million, suddenly she remembered she had a son. Honey, I've survived 71 years on this earth. I raised an autistic child alone. I've seen hard times, lean times, and dark times. Did you really think a woman in heels and a lawyer in a suit was going to finish me off? She picked the wrong 71-year-old grandfather to try that with. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. I want you to know that I was having a perfectly good day, not a great day. I'm 71 years old in Callaway, Arkansas, which means a good day is when your knees don't sound like bubble wrap when you stand up and your coffee is hot before it isn't. That's it. That's the whole bar. I had cleared it, my coffee was hot, my knees were quiet. I was watching the birds at the feeder Micah built me for my birthday. He engineered it so the squirrels couldn't get to it, designed a little counterweight mechanism, drew the blueprints on a Thursday night like it was nothing. And I was thinking that life, all things considered, was all right. Then I heard a car I didn't recognize pull into my driveway. A Lexus. Silver. Arkansas plates, but the kind of clean that said the owner didn't actually live in Arkansas anymore. Or if they did, they lived in the part of Arkansas that had forgotten it was Arkansas. I knew before the door opened. 11 years, and I knew. She stepped out in a blazer. A blazer. In Callaway. In September. The temperature was 83 degrees and she showed up in a blazer like she was about to give a TED Talk on why she abandoned her child. She had that look on her face. The one she used to wear as a teenager, when she'd broken something and was about to explain why it wasn't her fault. Practiced sympathy. Retail grief. Vanessa. My daughter. I didn't move from the porch. I held my coffee cup with both hands and waited. Daddy, she said. Daddy. Lord. Vanessa, I said. She walked up the porch steps like she owned them, in a way she once did. She grew up in this house, scraped her knees on these steps, had her prom pictures taken against that railing. The railing I repainted twice because Micah liked to peel it when he was anxious, and I just kept repainting it instead of stopping him because some battles aren't worth fighting, and some things are just paint. She looked at me like she wanted a hug. I looked at her like I was doing math. Can we talk? She said. You're already talking, I said. Might as well keep going. She sat at my kitchen table, Micah's kingdom, covered in his notebooks, his half-assembled circuit boards, his color-coded sticky notes that I had learned years ago never to move even a single inch. And she talked for 20 minutes without saying anything. She talked about healing. She talked about growth. She talked about how she'd been in therapy and had done the work. She actually said the work, like it was a branded product, and how she felt ready to have a relationship with her son. Her son. I want to pause here so you understand something. Vanessa left when Micah was 5 years old. He had just been formally diagnosed, though my late wife Patricia and I had known for 2 years before that. Vanessa was 27. She said she wasn't equipped. She said it wasn't fair to him, to have a parent who couldn't give him what he needed. She dressed abandonment up in the language of selflessness, and drove away in a Honda Civic and sent a Christmas card exactly once, in 2017, which arrived in January 2018, signed with her first name, and nothing else. Micah held the card for a moment, set it on the table, and went back to his coding. He was 11. He had already decided she wasn't a variable worth calculating. So when she sat in my kitchen in her blazer talking about her son, I drank my coffee slowly, and I did not throw it at her, which I consider one of the finer achievements of my 71 years. How is he? She asked finally. 16, I said. Smart. Healthy. Good. I saw the article, she said. There it was. I put my cup down. Did you? I said. Daddy, I'm proud of him. I want him to know that. I want to be part of. Vanessa, I said. What's the name of his third-grade teacher? She blinked. What? His third-grade teacher. The one who called me crying because Micah had a meltdown in the cafeteria and she didn't know what to do and I drove 40 minutes in a hailstorm to get there. What's her name? Silence. Mrs. Patterson, I said. Deborah Patterson. She retired in 2022. She still sends Micah a card on his birthday. Every year. On time. I picked my cup back up. You were saying something about being proud of him. Vanessa left 20 minutes later, saying she just wanted to reconnect. She hugged me at the door. I let her, the way you let a dentist do what they need to do. 3 days later, the lawyer's letter arrived. Peter Callahan has been my lawyer and my friend since 1987. We played softball together until his hip and my knees jointly decided to retire us. He is a good man, an honest man, and he has the particular kind of face that cannot lie, which is both an asset in our friendship and a liability in that moment when he looked up from the letter, looked at me across his desk, and said, "Raymond, she might have a case." I stared at him. "Explain that to me slowly," I said, using small words because I need to make sure I'm understanding you correctly before I have a stroke in your office. He explained it slowly. Vanessa had never legally terminated her parental rights. I had raised Micah on love and habit and necessity, and the kind of paperwork that accumulates in files but not courtrooms. No formal guardianship order, no legal documentation transferring authority. I was, on paper, a grandfather who had stepped in informally. Micah was a minor. His earnings from the SynPath acquisition, $5,600,000, were technically assets of a minor child. His legal parent had standing. I drove home in silence. I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before going inside. Micah was at the kitchen table, headphones on, 3 monitors going, looking at something that probably would have taken me 4 years to understand. I sat down across from him. He took his headphones off, which meant he already knew something was wrong. Because Micah reads a room the way other people read large print books. Easily, completely, and faster than you'd expect. "Pete says she might win," I said. "I'm not a man who says hard things out loud easily. Patricia used to say I processed emotions the way an old truck processed cold mornings. Slow to start, needed a few tries, but eventually got there. I had learned with Micah to say things plainly. No subtext, no implication. Just the thing." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked back at his screen. Then he said very quietly, the 5 words that I will hear for the rest of my life. "Just let her talk, Pop." "Micah, I'm handling it," he said, and put his headphones back on. "Now, I want to be honest with you." My first reaction was not confidence. My first reaction was the particular terror of a 71-year-old man, realizing that the 16-year-old across from him might be the smartest person in the situation. That is a disorienting feeling. That is I need to sit with this and possibly eat something kind of feeling. I made us both grilled cheese and I sat there while he typed, and I thought about the fact that I had been trusting this boy's instincts since he was 9 years old and told me the water heater was going to fail before it failed. He had noticed a sound pattern in the pipes, he explained. That indicated pressure inconsistency. And he was right, and I didn't know whether to get the heater fixed or enroll him in something. He had never been wrong about a pattern. I ate my grilled cheese. I decided to trust him. I also called Pete and said, "Get me whatever documentation we can find, and start building a file." Because trusting Micah didn't mean sitting on my hands. That boy got his instincts from somewhere. What Vanessa didn't understand, what her very expensive lawyer Sandra Pruitt, Esquire of Little Rock, did not understand, was that she was talking to a boy who built a communication app. Micah didn't build SynPath because he wanted money. He barely understood what $5.6 million meant in practical terms when the offer came in. His first question to Pete, delivered via a typed note he handed across the table, was, "Is this enough to pay for Pop's retirement and still fund 3 more years of development?" Pete had to excuse himself to compose himself in the hallway. Micah built SynPath because he spent his childhood watching nonverbal children get misunderstood. He watched them get labeled, dismissed, redirected. He had been one of them in the early years. And he knew, because I had shown him, that the problem wasn't the children. The problem was that nobody had built the right bridge. So he built one. The app used pattern recognition and adaptive AI to help nonverbal children communicate with caregivers and teachers in real time. It had 340,000 active users in 14 months. It had made grown adults in Silicon Valley cry during the demo pitch, which Micah delivered via a pre-recorded video because he didn't want to fly to California. And the CEO of the acquiring firm had called me afterward and said, "Mr. Booker, your grandson is something else." "Yes," I said, "he is." What SynPath required Micah to understand, deeply and completely, was communication. How people say things, how people avoid saying things, the gap between what someone transmits and what they mean. He had been studying that gap his entire life, watching neurotypical people talk around things, perform feelings, construct narratives, and he had gotten very, very good at finding the truth inside the noise. So when Vanessa started texting him, he responded. I didn't know at first. He told me later, after it was over, walking me through it like a patient professor with a slow student, which in this context I was. Her first text, Micah, it's your mom. I hope this is okay. I just want you to know I'm thinking of you and I love you. His response 3 hours later, Hi, how did you get this number? She answered that my number was listed and she'd gotten his from a mutual contact. He said okay, and nothing else. She texted again 2 days later. He responded, slowly, briefly, warmly enough to keep the line open. Then he started asking questions. What do you remember about me when I was little? She responded with something vague about him being so curious and bright. Generic. The kind of thing you'd say about a child you'd seen in a movie. What was my favorite food when I was 5? Long pause. Then, I remember you liked pasta. He liked pasta now. At 5, he had refused pasta entirely due to texture. He ate exactly 4 foods at age 5. Rice, scrambled eggs, apple slices with no peel, and a specific brand of crackers that I had to drive to Fort Smith to buy, because Walmart stopped carrying them, and the look on his face when I came home with 3 boxes is something I will take to my grave. She didn't know any of that. Why did you decide to come back now? He texted. Her answer, and I want you to really sit with this. Her answer was, I saw what you built, and I realized I couldn't keep letting fear keep me from my son. She saw what he built, not him, not who he became, what he built. Micah screenshot every single text. Then he went to Pete's office by himself. He called Pete, arranged a meeting, and I found out about it after and handed Pete a printed document that was 14 pages long. It was every text, every voicemail transcript, organized chronologically with marginal annotations explaining what each response revealed about her intent and knowledge. The annotations were color-coded. Pete called me that evening and said, Raymond, I owe you an apology. What for? For suggesting you might lose. I am not a tech genius. I cannot build an app. I can barely update my phone without calling Micah from the other room. But I am a 71-year-old man from Arkansas who worked 34 years as a county claims adjuster. And if there is one thing that job teaches you, it's how to find the thing people buried. I started making calls. Vanessa's husband, a man named Glenn who I had met exactly twice, and both times he'd given me the kind of handshake that's more announcement than greeting. Glenn was in financial trouble. His contracting business in Fayetteville had 3 outstanding liens against it, a lawsuit from a subcontractor, and a loan restructure that had been filed in Benton County Civil Court. Public record. A morning with a computer and a Pacer account, and there it was. The timing of Vanessa's return was not grief finally becoming courage. It was math. But what really did it, what made me sit back in my chair and close my eyes for a full minute, was the social media. I am not on social media. I consider it voluntary surveillance by people who also pay for the privilege. But my neighbor Connie is very much on social media, and she is also deeply devoted to justice. And when I explained the situation to her over the fence one evening, she had Vanessa's Facebook profile printed and in my hands by the next morning. 11 years of posts. Her wedding to Glenn in 2019. Vacations. Restaurant dinners. A series of posts about her wellness journey. Her husband's company announcements. Christmas photos. Birthday celebrations. Micah did not appear once. Not once. Not a my son is doing well, or a thinking of family today. Not a trace. For 11 years, on the platform where she documented her wellness journey, her son did not exist. Until September 14th, 2024, 2 days after the SynPath acquisition made regional news. Her post read, So proud of my son's incredible achievement. He has always been exceptional. A mother's heart is so full. She got 47 likes. One commenter said, You must be so proud. Another said, Apple doesn't fall far. The hearing was on a Thursday. Judge Loretta Sims presiding. Family Court. Faulkner County. I wore the same suit I wore to Patricia's funeral, because it's the only one I own, and because I thought Patricia would want to be there for this. Pete was calm. He'd been calm since the 14-page document. The kind of calm a man gets when he knows what cards he's holding. Vanessa arrived in a charcoal suit. Sandra Pruitt, her attorney, was one of those women who walked like she was already winning. The posture of someone who charged $450 an hour, and felt that should be evident from across the room. She set a leather binder on her table. The binder had tabs. I had a USB drive. Pete had a banker's box. I looked at the box and thought about Micah, who had stayed home because he wanted to. Because he said the hearing wasn't a place that would require him, and I had agreed because I have never once forced Micah into a space that didn't need him. He was at home. His headphones were on. He'd made me a thermos of coffee for the drive and set it by my keys without saying anything. The boy, Judge Sims, came in, and we all stood, and I thought, Patricia, this is for you and me both. You did the first 5 years. I did the next 11. Let's finish this. Sandra Pruitt opened with a performance that I grudgingly admit was impressive. She laid out the legal framework cleanly. Parental rights never terminated, informal arrangement never codified, a mother who had faced mental health challenges, that was the phrase, doing a lot of weight-bearing for the word abandonment, and who had now stabilized, healed, and sought to be part of her minor child's life, and involved in decisions regarding his substantial financial assets. She was careful. She never said she wants the money. She said she wants appropriate parental involvement in asset management for a minor. Same thing. Better lighting. Judge Sims listened without expression. Then she asked if Vanessa would like to speak. Pete glanced at me. I shook my head slightly. Let her talk. Vanessa stood. She was good. I'll give her that. She had clearly rehearsed because she cried at exactly the right moment. Not too early, not too late. Just when the narrative needed emotional confirmation. She talked about being overwhelmed, about not being equipped, about the years of therapy and the journey to understanding herself. She talked about wanting to know her son. It was a good performance. It lasted 6 minutes. Then Judge Sims looked at her over her glasses and said, Ms. Pruitt, Vanessa, I'd like to ask you a few questions directly. Sandra started to rise. Your Honor, my client is a grown adult who has just asked this court to grant her significant legal and financial authority over her child, Sims said pleasantly. I'd like to speak with her directly. Please sit. S.W. Sandra sat. I looked straight ahead and did not smile, which was the hardest thing I did that entire day. Vanessa, the judge said, can you describe Micah's primary sensory sensitivities and how his daily routine accommodates them? Silence. Take your time, the judge said. He needs quiet spaces, Vanessa said. He doesn't like loud environments. Specific accommodations. What does he eat? What are his sleep patterns? What is his communication style under stress? More silence. Vanessa looked at Sandra. Sandra could not help her. Nobody could help her, because you cannot prepare an answer for a question that requires 11 years of presence. I haven't been able to be involved, which is why I'm here. Who attended his IEP meetings? Sims asked. His what? Individualized education student has, every year, where the teachers and specialists sit down with the parent and discuss the child's specific learning plan. I attended every single one from kindergarten through the year Micah decided he was done with traditional school at 14, and we moved to a specialist tutor he actually liked. Vanessa didn't know what an IEP was. The judge made a note. I watched her make it. Tell me about SynPath, Sims said. Walk me through what it does. Vanessa brightened slightly. Safer ground, she thought. It's a communication app. For children. It's very successful, and Micah obviously has a gift. How does it work? It helps children communicate with their parents. It uses adaptive pattern recognition, Judge Sims said, to build individualized communication profiles for nonverbal users, integrating with standard AAC frameworks. It doesn't help children communicate with parents generally. It builds a unique language bridge for each user. Your son built it specifically because standard communication aids weren't adaptive enough for children with highly individualized sensory profiles. She paused. I read about it when this case was filed, because I believed I should know what we were talking about. Another pause. Did you use the product before you came here today? Vanessa said nothing. The answer was written on her face in a font size anyone could read from across the room. Then Pete stood up. He went through it like a man who had all the time in the world. 11 years of school records. My signature. Every single year. Every conference, every specialist visit, every accommodation form. My name, my handwriting, my number in the emergency contact field, and below it in the secondary field. Micah's grandfather. Only contact. Medical files. Same story. Tax records. Vanessa, filing jointly with Glenn, had claimed zero dependents for 11 consecutive years. She had legally told the United States government, on penalty of perjury, that she was not financially supporting a child every year for 11 years. Signed her name to it. Sandra Pruitt wrote something on her legal pad with the energy of a woman no longer planning her victory dinner. Then Pete said, "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a series of text communications between the petitioner and the minor child, as well as a sworn written statement from Micah Raymond Booker, submitted in his own words at his own request." He handed the USB drive to the clerk. Then he handed Judge Sims the statement. She read it. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the clerk's pen. Sims read for what felt like 3 full minutes. I know because I counted my own breaths. At one point she stopped, looked up briefly at nothing in particular, and then looked back down. I knew what she was reading. Micah had shown it to me the night before, sitting at the kitchen table, sliding it across to me without ceremony, going back to his laptop while I read it, giving me the privacy to have whatever reaction I was going to have. I had read it twice. Then I had gone to the bathroom and run cold water over my face for a while. He wrote about the knock. The specific knock I do on his bedroom door, 3 short, 1 pause, 2 short, that I developed when he was 7 because he needed to know exactly who was coming before the door opened, and we figured out that pattern together after about a month of trial and error. He wrote about the crackers from Fort Smith. He wrote about Patricia's last year when I was managing her illness and his needs simultaneously, and how he was 9 years old and he started making me tea in the mornings without being asked, because he had identified, he wrote, that my cortisol indicators were elevated, and he had read that warm liquids helped, and it was the only variable he could control. My 9-year-old was making me tea because he was worried about me. I hadn't known he understood what was happening with Patricia. He never said. He just made tea. He wrote about the app. He wrote that he built it because of a boy he'd seen at a therapy group when he was 11, a boy who had something to say and no way to say it. And he had thought, this is an engineering problem, and engineering problems have solutions and I have time. He wrote that the reason he had time was that Raymond Elias Booker had organized his world carefully enough that he had always had time to think. And then the last lines, the ones that Pete had warned me about, the ones he said he was entering into evidence but that the judge would not read aloud, because Micah had requested they remain between himself, the court, and Pop. Judge Sims set the statement down. She looked at Vanessa for a long moment. Vanessa had stopped performing. That was the tell. The grief was real now, but it was a different kind. The grief of someone watching something they wanted recede beyond reach, which is not the same as the grief of missing someone. And I think somewhere in herself she knew the difference even then. The petition for reinstatement of parental authority is denied, Sims said. Sandra Pruitt did not react. Professionals absorb losses differently. Vanessa made a small sound. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am granting formal, permanent legal guardianship to Raymond Elias Booker, which should have been documented years ago and frankly reflects a gap in the system as much as anything else. Mr. Booker, you'll work with your attorney to formalize this properly. She looked at Pete. I trust that's in motion. Already drafted, Your Honor. Good. She looked at Vanessa's tax documentation one more time. I'm also referring the petitioner's 11 years of dependent status filings to the appropriate revenue authority for review. That is not punitive. That is procedural. She said it the way you'd discuss the weather. We're adjourned. She stood. We stood. She left. Sandra Pruitt had her binder under her arm and her coat over her other arm, and was halfway to the door before Vanessa had fully registered what had happened. I sat for a moment. Pete put his hand on my shoulder. Raymond, give me a second, I said. I thought about Patricia. I thought about when Micah was 3 years old and we first really knew. The two of us sitting at this same kitchen table while he slept, Patricia's hand on mine, saying we'll figure it out. I thought about how she didn't get to see him build the feeder, or get the acquisition offer, or write that statement. I thought about how she would have handled today. She would have cried in the car, and then made a large meal and acted like it was just Tuesday. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked out into the Arkansas afternoon, which was warm and indifferent and smelled like fall coming, the way it always does in October. People think revenge is loud. They think it looks like a dramatic courtroom speech, or a door slamming, or a point being made that echoes. Movies have done that to us. Real revenge is quiet. Real revenge is the specific sound of the right outcome arriving after a long time of being uncertain. I drove home. I stopped at Brookshire's and bought the ingredients for pasta. the specific kind Micah likes now, which is different from any pasta you'll find in a cookbook because we modified it together over about 3 years of negotiation. And I made dinner. We ate at the kitchen table. His notebooks were still there. His monitors were still on. He'd been building something new all day. I could tell by the specific focus quality of his silence, which is different from all his other silences in ways I couldn't explain to you but would recognize in a dark room. She lost, I said. I know, he said. Pete texted. We ate. The tax referral was Pete's idea, I said. No, it wasn't. I looked at him. He didn't look up, just slightly, the corner of his mouth. That boy. I found out about the retirement account on a Saturday 3 weeks later. I was sitting on the porch with my coffee when the bank notification came through on my phone, and I looked at it for a long time, reading it 3 times the way you reread something that can't be right. And then I sat there some more. $200,000. Transferred. A note in the transaction memo field. Banks give you limited characters for memo fields, which Micah had looked up beforehand. That said simply, for Raymond. He knows why. There was also a physical sticky note on my coffee maker the next morning. I don't know when he put it there. I don't know how he did it without waking me. He is 16 and I am 71. And apparently stealth is a skill set I was not informed about. The note said, for showing up, I stood in my kitchen in my socks and my robe at 6 in the morning, reading a sticky note from my autistic grandson, who once couldn't speak and now builds bridges for other children who can't speak, who quietly dismantled his own mother's legal case with 14 color-coded pages and 6 weeks of patient, deliberate conversation, who made me tea when he was 9 because he was worried about my cortisol. I stood there for a while. Then I made coffee and went to the porch and watched the birds at the feeder he built me, with the counterweight mechanism that keeps the squirrels out. And I thought, Patricia, you should see this kid. Outside, a squirrel sat at the base of the feeder post, baffled and furious, trying the same approach for the 4th time and getting the same result. Some problems, I thought, are engineering problems. And some people are just squirrels who never figured that out. Vanessa's appeal, when it came, and it came because Sandra Pruitt was nothing if not thorough, was denied in February. The tax review resulted in penalties and back payment that totaled, Pete told me with a particular quality of neutrality in his voice, more than she came looking for. She hasn't been in contact since. Micah hasn't asked about her. He is, as of this writing, 3 months into his next project. He won't tell me what it is yet. He showed me a diagram last Friday that I stared at for a full minute before admitting I had no idea what I was looking at. He nodded patiently. He's used to this. He'll tell me when it's ready. I'll be on the porch. Raymond Elias Booker lives in Callaway, Arkansas, with his grandson Micah. He drinks his coffee hot. His knees are still loud. He considers both of these facts acceptable. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being part of this sphere.